I did a lot of sightseeing on weekends, and I often went to see university and other libraries, and I decided I wanted to become a librarian. I applied in London and at McGill. Now, they had no room for me that year in London, and I would have had to stay another year to working. But at McGill also told me that a Canadian librarian would need Canadian training. So if I wanted to become a librarian in Canada, I should really go be trained in Canada. So I came home and got a Bachelor of Library Science at McGill. I worked for a couple of years at the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, and then I got a job as a senior librarian at the Royal Bank, a distinguished business library that actually served a lot of outsiders who needed business information, and the bank considered that that was a good service for them to be producing. The bank was open to letting me be active in library organizations, and I had a chance to be president of, well, the Quebec Library Association, the Corporation des Bibliothécaires Professionnels du Québec, and a member of the Quebec Public Libraries Commission, which met two or three times a year in Quebec, which was great fun to belong to, and all of which I enjoyed all that. But my most exciting experience was with the Special Libraries Association. Now, a special library is one in a business or a museum or a hospital or an organization like that, where you provide information for the staff. And SLA, Special Libraries Association, was a large organization based in New York with chapters all over the United States and 2 in Canada, including Montreal and Toronto. And they held an annual conference in various cities, and in 1969 it was held in Montreal, and I became its chair, and we were some 600 librarians at the Queen Elizabeth Hotel. And I just mentioned that actually we were there at the same time as John Lennon and Yoko Ono were there, and everybody was coming to look at them. I caught a glimpse of them as they were leaving. But through this, being chair of this big association meeting, I was asked to run for its president. And amazingly, I won, although I believe that Canadians had a chance. There was one other Canadian president before me, and I believe every Canadian member of SLA would vote for the Canadian, and so we had a pretty good chance to win. But that began a marvelous addition to my work at the bank, because I had to be allowed to be, and they allowed me to travel, and I had to visit a number of chapters that year, including, lucky me, Hawaii. I became known in the library world beyond SLA, especially the International Federation of Library Associations. And they had a chapter here in Montreal, and a conference was held here in Montreal, and I was asked to chair the program committee, and I became a member and then was involved later with the research and education department, and I chaired that for a while. Naturally, we had annual conferences. And I went to Kenya, Japan, the Philippines, and many other cities like London and Paris, and we went all over the world. It was I was very, very lucky to do that. Meanwhile, I was asked to teach a course on special libraries and one on business literature at McGill, which I enjoyed thoroughly. At the bank itself, women were not of much importance, and it happened that I was the best paid woman in the bank for many years. In the branches, the women would train the new young men, who would then be promoted, and while the women stayed put. Other organizations were beginning to promote women to higher positions, and the Bank of Montreal chose to name Madame Vanier to their board of directors. I did read through the who's who, but I went to see the president and suggested that the bank might have some organization where there was a competent businesswoman near the top who would be more suitable than a famous wife or a soprano. That worked. They chose one of the top executives of Steinberg's. Meanwhile, I paid him another visit and suggested that they might hire and promote more women in the bank. This ended in his forming a committee, 5 men and 5 women, to look at what might happen. A woman was hired to advise the personnel committee on the women's situation. The committee met for a year, and a report was written in 1977 and presented to the executive committee. And it was not long before one of the committee members became one of the executive. I felt I had made a difference. About this time, a position became vacant at the library school. Many of my fun activities were slowing down, and I felt I might be ready to leave the bank and applied for the job. I was really lucky to be hired as an associate professor, and I enjoyed that until I retired. I was still able to be active in the associations, and I really had always enjoyed teaching.